The woodlands near my home in the little Scottish town had always been my sanctuary. Every evening I would leash up Macy, my ever-faithful golden staff, and we would venture deep into the thick of it. The towering trees, their leaves turned to fiery reds and oranges in the crisp autumn air, created a cathedral of nature. The solitude, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds, was a blanket to my weary mind. Mace loved it too, bounding through the brush with the unbridled enthusiasm only a dog could muster. On rare occasions, I'd stumble across the remnants of teenage revelries, empty beer cans, crushed packets of crisps, and scorched circles of blackened earth where campfires had burned. But for the most part, the woods remained pristine and untouched. It was on one such walk, just as twilight painted the horizon with hues of purple and gold, that I noticed something unusual. A tree, its bark etched with peculiar symbols, lines intersecting at odd angles, encircled by what looked like jagged runes. The marks appeared to have been made recently, as if gouged with a sharp tool. Curious, I pressed on, Mace at my side. The further I walked, the more markings I found, their numbers increasing with each step. Then came something stranger still. Crude pentagrams woven from sticks, each tied with black twine, suspended from large poles driven into the ground. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. Probably just some kids mucking about, I told myself. Halloween wasn't far off, and maybe this was part of some elaborate prank. Mace, however, was acting differently. Her ears stood rigid and her nose twitched incessantly as though she had caught a scent. She paused often, her gaze fixed on the unseen depths of the woods, tail stiff and unmoving. A gnawing unease crept into my gut, but I forced myself to keep going. After all, I'd been walking these woods for years. What could possibly be out there? That's when I saw it, the old cave. Its entrance was narrow, almost unnoticeable behind a curtain of brambles. It wasn't the first time I'd come across caves in these woods. These deep caverns stretched for miles. As I approached, a low sound reached my ears, barely perceptible at first, like the sound of a hum in the air. But the closer I got, the clearer it became, chanting, a deep, rhythmic intonation that sent shivers racing down my spine. Mace froze, her body taut like a coiled spring. Her ears perked, and a low growl rumbled in her throat. I clipped her leash back on, her sudden unease infecting me. I should have turned back then. Instinct screamed at me to leave, but curiosity, that feeling that always got the better of me, urged me forward. I crept closer, no more than 10 feet from the cave's entrance. The chanting was unmistakable, a melody that resonated with an almost primal energy. A flickering orange glow illuminated the inside, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. My heart thudded against my ribcage as I peered inside. They stood in a circle, 10, maybe 15 figures, clad in green robes, their faces obscured by hoods. They didn't move, standing motionless, spilling forth the haunting chant. In the middle of the circle, a fire roared, its flames licking hungrily at the air. Hanging from the cave walls were more of those pentagrams and other strange symbols. Mace let out a sharp, high-pitched bark, a sound I had never heard from her before. My stomach dropped as the chanting stopped abruptly. The robed figures almost turned as one, their heads snapping toward the cave's entrance. Their faces, what I could see of them beneath their hoods, were obscured by grotesque masks resembling a goat's skull, with curling horns and hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave. I turned and ran, Macy right beside me, her leash taut as she pulled me along. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart hammering against my chest like a drum. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear the faint rustle of movement behind me. Were they following? It wasn't until I was a good 40 feet away that I risked a glance over my shoulder. 3 of them stood at the cave's entrance. They didn't move. They simply watched as I fled. It was almost worse than if they had chased me. I didn't stop running until I reached the well-worn path that led out of the woods. By then, the sky had darkened completely, the shadows of the trees stretching long and foreboding under the pale light of the moon. Mace with her tail tucked between her legs, and I wasn't much better off. My hands shook as I fumbled to unlock my front door. I sat down on the safety of my sofa, my mind racing, replaying what just happened. Who were they? What were they doing? Was that some kind of cult? Around here, a group of deranged pranksters, and what would they have done if I hadn't run? I reported it to the police the next morning, recounting every detail of what I had seen. They assured me they would investigate, but weeks had passed and I heard nothing more. Part of me wondered if they investigated. Another part feared they had and found nothing, as though the robed figures had vanished into the ether. I never ventured that deep into the woods again. The outer paths and open fields became my new route, far from the cave and its unsettling secrets. Even now I sometimes catch myself glancing toward the woods, half expecting to see those masked figures standing silently among the shadows, watching, waiting. The English countryside had always been my refuge, a world away from the noise and chaos of modern life. Retirement had gifted me with the time to explore its rolling hills and hidden trails, accompanied by my loyal companions, Max and Tyson. They were both German shepherds, big and strong, with boundless energy that made them perfect walking partners. On a warm summer's day, I'd load them into the back of my old estate car and drive out to one of our favourite spots. Today it was a quiet trail along a gentle stream leading into the woodland. The sun filtered through the canopy of trees, dappling the ground with light. Max and Tyson bounded ahead, their ears perked up and tails wagging furiously. I carried their favourite tennis ball, worn and slightly muddy, ready to toss it for them at every opportunity. Their joy was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile as I watched them tear through the brush, each determined to be the first to retrieve it. The trail was peaceful, the babble of the stream mingling with the distant hum of insects. I tossed the ball again, and both dogs shot off like arrows, crashing through the undergrowth. They always brought it back, Max usually victorious, his tail wagging with pride. As we walked further along the path, the dogs' behaviour began to change. They kept pausing, their heads turning sharply to one side, ears pricked. It wasn't unusual for them to pick up on wildlife scents, foxes, rabbits, or the occasional badger. But this was different. They weren't chasing a scent, they were fixated, their eyes staring into the trees. "What is it, boys?" I asked, my voice light to mask the unease creeping in. I followed their gaze but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Perhaps it was just a fox scurrying out of sight. Still, their interest didn't waver, and eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to let them lead me, stepping off the main path toward where they seemed so intent to go. I threw the tennis ball again, this time deeper into the brush, hoping it might distract them. They bolted after it with their usual enthusiasm, but this time they didn't come back right away. I called their names. Max, Tyson, come on boys. A few moments later Tyson emerged, but not with the ball. My heart sank when I saw what he had instead. A fox's head, fresh and bloodied, its lifeless eyes staring blankly. "Drop it," I shouted, my voice louder than I intended. "Get away from it." Tyson obeyed, dropping the head with a thud. Max came trotting back as well, his nose still sniffing the air, both dogs now tethered by their leashes. My stomach churned as I stared at the grisly sight. The head looked fresh, no signs of decay, the severed edge raw and glistening. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate further. I had to see where Tyson had found it. Just a few paces away, through the undergrowth, I came across something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A makeshift hut constructed from sticks, barely large enough for a person to crouch inside. In the middle of the crude shelter sat a metal bucket. Inside the bucket were more fox heads, 6, maybe 7, each one as fresh as the one Tyson had carried. I recoiled in disgust. The decapitated heads were stacked haphazardly, and tangled wire rested at the bottom of the bucket. The air carried no smell of rot, which only made it worse. These poor animals had been killed only hours ago. A sharp snap broke the silence, the unmistakable sound of a branch cracking underfoot. My head whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. The dogs, ever alert, stiffened, their eyes locked on something in the trees. And then I saw him. A man half hidden behind a tree trunk peered directly at me. His face was obscured by long, scraggly dark hair, and he wore a faded blue shirt and a baseball cap. He wasn't close, but he wasn't far either, maybe 50 feet. His eyes weren't on me, but on the hut, as if gauging how much I'd seen. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky but firm. There was no response. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the day. This man, whoever he was, had something to do with the grisly scene in front of me. I tightened my grip on the dog's leashes and took a cautious step back, my heart thudding in my chest. The man didn't move, but his presence alone was enough to set every nerve in my body alight. Slowly I backed away, urging Max and Tyson to follow me. The dogs didn't take their eyes off him, their bodies tense but not aggressive. They seemed to understand the need for quiet. Step by step I edged my way back to the path, never turning my back fully on the man or the hut. When I reached the main trail, I quickened my pace, my only goal now to get out of the woods and back to the car. As I neared the stream, the trees began to thin, and for the first time since discovering the hut, I allowed myself to exhale. But then I saw him again. He stood at the edge of the woods, half concealed behind a tree, just like before. This time I noticed something glinting in his hand, a long, cleaver-like knife. Anxiety crashed over me in waves. Why was he following me? And what kind of person decapitated foxes in the woods? Max and Tyson, sensing my fear, stayed close, their ears swiveling back and forth. They were brave dogs, and their presence gave me a shred of courage I wouldn't have otherwise had. But the thought of what might have happened if they hadn't been with me sent a cold shiver down my spine. I didn't stop moving until I reached my car. I opened the back and the dogs leapt in, their usual energy subdued by the tension in the air. With trembling hands, I started the engine and drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds to make sure we weren't being followed. That night I sat in my living room, replaying the events in my mind. I couldn't shake the image of the hut, the bucket, the fox heads, and that man. I debated calling the police, but what could I say? Would they take me seriously? Or dismiss it as the ramblings of an old man? I decided not to return to that trail again. The countryside was vast, with plenty of other places to walk. Every so often I'd drive past that area, and I couldn't help but wonder about that man, and what might have happened if I had been alone. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.